This question has come up, and it's so important. And I think you're such a qualified person to address it. It's coming from Lisa Tuttle, one of our daily listeners and friends, and she says, "I find." Let me put my glasses on here. A second. I find um, text, the text and translations, to be very male centered. It makes me hunger for a female lens. Can you please speak to this in the context of how are we to understand how to make sense of it? Thank you.
Yeah. Thank you for that question, Lisa. This is, I think, just taking a step back from the perspective of history of religions and a professor of religion. This is the reality with religious texts and spiritual texts and just any kind of text across ancient history and across the world. And so the fact that the person speaking or the perspective often comes from a male voice, I think that's not unusual, sadly speaking.
Could I add one thing to that? It seems like it's not only coming from a male voice, but it's being delivered to a male ear as well.
Yes. Thank you. And that's, I think it's to be, yeah, sadly, it's to be expected, I think, because both the speaker and the listener are assumed to be male. And before the contemporary period, this is pretty much the case across the board, with I think not just religious texts, but any kind of major literary productions. You've got this assumed male speaker and male listener, and so I think that in itself is not unusual. I think what the Bhagavatam, what makes it unusual, is that it provides voices of women and female heroes in the story that allow us to that we can extract out of the story and tell the story from our perspective, right? So what I mean to say, and this is kind of a theme of my study of the Bhagavatam, is that as readers, we have to find our story in the text. And the Bhagavatam provides plenty of resources for everyone from any walk of life to find their story in the text. And the act of retelling it from where we stand, that's the act of reading. That's the act of commentary, right? Throughout generations, throughout history, generations of commentators and readers have taken the Bhagavatam, taken this wonderful text, and retold the text, retold the story, and interpreted it to speak to their generation and their times and their personal needs. And that's what keeps the text alive. That's what preserves it over time, is when it's deployed and in a new way to speak to new generations. In fact, that's more or less the definition of a classic of literature, is a work that speaks across time and across geography, right? So the Bhagavatam, this is our responsibility as its readers, right? Is to say, number one, if we find something of value in this work, which we do on this audience, really, I think has been steadily studying the Bhagavatam on a daily basis. If we find something of value, then the way to honor it and the way to value it is to tell those stories, to interpret it in a way that speaks to our time, our generation, our communities. And that's how we preserve the text. That's how we honor it. So I want to say this is a concern that has emerged in the last half century, maybe 1 century, around the world. That means we have to, the Bhagavatam has the capacity to speak to this concern, but we may need to tell those stories in ways that address those concerns for a modern and postmodern audience. And there's plenty of resources to do that, from the Brahmins' wives to the gopis to the wonderful characters of Kunti and Draupadi. You have these heroes who are women and who are extraordinary, and you have villains who are women, and you've got the full range of characters, and these are deep personalities. They're not unidimensional or
Cookie cutter.
two-dimensional
Yeah.
cookie cutter women. These are very rich personalities who struggle with difficult husbands, who have a wonderful partner, who have children who are delightful, who have terrible children, right? They are women who are single and not married. There are women who leave relationships. It's there's like the full range of fighters and leaders. It's all there, but sometimes those voices are buried. They're under the surface, and we kind of have to kind of pull it out and say, oh, here it is, and this story speaks to me, and let me tell this story in a way that highlights this character, right? So we're not inventing, but we're digging, we're mining, we're drawing out. And that's the marker of a classic, is when it allows us to draw out, right? The scholar in University of Chicago, a theologian, Christian theologian named David Tracy, he says, a classic is a text that overflows with meaning, right? It overflows with meaning. You can't contain it in a bottle and put the lid on it and say, here it is. I have explained the Bhagavatam for you, and this is all that's left. Right? This is what it is. You've got it all now. No one can ever say that. And this is why after generations, we know something like there are 90 commentaries on the Bhagavatam, right? In Sanskrit, just Sanskrit alone. Okay. We don't have all of them. Just to put that in context, most Sanskrit texts get like 3 or 4 commentaries at most, right? So it's a text you can't bottle up. There's always more to say. And I think we may not know Sanskrit today, but we have to act as commentators. We have to speak the text and explain it and understand it in a way that speaks to us and to our generation.
Okay,